Welcome to Leading Minds Revealed, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on how today's top leaders harness the power of mindfulness to conquer the fast-paced, ever-changing world of business. In each episode, we sit down with C-suite executives and leaders who share their strategies for navigating rapid change with skill and clarity. Join us as we uncover the transformative mindsets that drive extraordinary leadership. These insights aren't found in business books, and they'll revolutionize the way you lead. And now, here's your host, Michael Apollo.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Leading Minds Revealed. In this episode, we'll explore the reality of building and sustaining teams in today's fast-moving world of AI, founder-led businesses, and rapid organizational change. You'll learn how leaders can embrace neurodiversity, foster employee engagement, and navigate the unique challenges of working in founder-led, high-growth environments. My guest today has built her career across recruitment, fashion, digital media, and startups, leading through resilience, adaptability, and a deeply human approach to talent. She is now the head of people and talent at SBE Media Group, overseeing both Supercar Blondie, an awesome YouTube influencer and channel that I've been following for many, many years, and SBX Cars. From scaling global teams during the pandemic to embedding AI into recruitment practices, she is shaping how organizations grow and thrive in disruptive times. With that, meet my guest, Jo Knowler. Welcome to the show, Jo.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, really, and I know that you have a friend joining us too in your office. I believe it's your pooch. What's their name?
He's Frank. So
Frank.
he's LinkedIn famous. He's been featured many a times on my page, and I think he's the one that gets me the likes more than anything, more than any of my my information and my sharings. It's Frank that gets the likes.
Well, let's hope Frank joins us here. And yeah, I know on the social media space, these animals are great. And so, we're living in this age of AI, tech, innovation, evolution, and I'd love to start with looking at the big picture. You have a lot of experience in the space of people management and recruitment and growing organizations. And so, how do you think about building teams, specifically, like just building teams in this rapidly evolving age of AI and innovation?
You can't forward plan too much. Is the current situation. I think you can't look. I mean, a lot of businesses probably still do. They'll look at a 5-year plan. I don't think that many roles will even exist in 5 years' time. So you can't plan that far ahead. So being reactive obviously is not always anyone's preferred, but I think with the way that the kind of the tech and the AI technology is evolving, we have to be much more responsive and reactive, and jumping on things quicker. Even the conversations I've been having in the last couple of weeks, I feel like we probably should have had them 6 months ago, maybe even 12 months ago. Luckily we're doing it now, but again, we should have been on the pulse of what's going on. So the bigger picture stuff is I think, we've spoken about this before, is probably quarter by quarter. Yes, you can kind of forward plan maybe your budget and what you want the business to achieve, but with your teams, I wouldn't want to push anybody into that so quickly, because the role may no longer exist because we might have an incredible software that does it for you. So working with the teams to make sure that they're future-proofing their jobs and their careers, and utilizing tools out there nowadays to make sure that they've still got a job in the career and the industry that they like. It might just tweaked slightly.
Yeah, I remember, when we were chatting last, that you were mentioning how you are on these 3-month strategy planning cycles right now. And especially, looking at SB Media and how, established you are in the YouTube space and across other social media platforms, the video development, editing, all these platforms, recruitment as well, is evolving so rapidly, and we're able to augment that with AI now, right? And so, like you said, a lot of these careers are being tweaked, shifted, changed, and some of them, are completely transforming, right? And we need to transform with that. And so, how do you think of that as a leader in recruitment, and how do you think about that in terms of the type of skills that we need to have coming into the workforce today?
It's really interesting because I don't think there's many experts out there. So you can't be an expert in this field right now, as much as people might like to sell themselves to be the expert. You can't be. I've been speaking to AI creatives, particularly for the last 3 weeks, and every single person uses a different tool, a different number of tools, takes a different amount of time, it costs a bit different money. So you can't be an expert in the recruitment of that field anymore. So actually what you need to do is you need to continuously educate yourself, test and learn, try and pick up those tools ourselves. I can't work with my content director about creating, a 60-second video without him and I testing it and seeing what it really requires, and can we even get close to what our expectations are? Well, no, not without 18 different tools. Okay, so that means that we have to invest. So um the kind of recruitment and talent strategy at the moment for me is very much education. I've got to continue to learn. I've got to learn from those people out there that are spending that time and energy ensuring that their jobs are still around so that, I can see who we need to be recruiting for the future. And that's very different from what I've done in my past. The jobs in fashion that I've worked in is very structured. You have a buyer and you have a merchandiser. In the US, it's called a planner. Um, and that and you have a designer, and they work in a three-pronged triangle approach. And that still stands to this day. So I don't have to change the way I interview or how, what we do in an interview process, because it still works like that. But then if you go into the landscape of marketing, you you can't, again, you're not gonna work with somebody that did things a certain way 5 years ago, because that's changed. Human behavior's changed. The way that we the way that we market things has got to be different because the people we're marketing to are very different. So a recruitment process can't be how we've always done a recruitment process. I mean, this is a big topic, but do we need CVs anymore? That I think there's many roles, and I love when I do a recruitment piece without a CV involved. I have a conversation with somebody, and I know there's a couple of really interesting recruitment strategies in the UK for particularly for the retail industry. So for people, sales assistants, so shop floor workers, why do they need to send a CV in? It's all about customer service. So actually, the people are trying new models of that. And, I've looked in gamification of interview process before. I mean, I did that years ago. It's amazing. It just costs so much money. So actually, are those things going to become cheaper so that we can embed them into our processes more and more, and actually make sure that an interview process isn't you and I sat and you grilling me and asking me what my job is all about and how I do my job, because you're not going to get the best out of everybody. We've talked about neurodiversity. Some of the best people I work with would absolutely fail an interview. Never mind if you ask them to sit down and do a test. But if you got them on a task, a practical task, they'd fly. They'd do incredible. So I think recruiters and talent acquisition people and even HR hiring managers need to look at really what the recruitment process is and whether it's fit for purpose anymore. Can you mix it up? Can you do something completely different? Because I think you kind of have to now.
Yeah, it seems like it's from what I'm hearing, we're taking a much more human approach, a human-centered approach to who we're choosing to be on our teams, and looking at the skills that they have, and um, the skills that they don't have. And, you know, I want to I want to explore that a little bit here. You know, what are the skills that you're not looking for? What are the types of attributes and qualities in this time of massive change, AI innovation? uh, many different tech platforms. What are the things that you don't want to look for, and also what are the things that could get in the way for people who are looking at today's job market and looking to enter into, you know, a tech company, working with a tech company, for example?
That's a hard one because I think because worked in startups for a long time, I think the attributes to somebody that wants to work in a startup and do well in a startup probably are perfect for the platform, where we are now. We need somebody that is agile. We need somebody that is adaptable. We need somebody that knows that that's probably not their job, but there's nobody else to do it, so they've got to do it. And I think that's that kind of willingness to learn, to take feedback. That's obviously a hard thing for a lot of people, especially if they're early into their careers, for someone saying, yeah, you're not doing that correctly. Um, you kind of probably have to be really thick skinned straight away because, especially when it comes with creativity, not everyone agrees on what's good. So you have to kind of go, okay, that's how I'm going to get the feedback if someone doesn't like my style. And again, that's quite a hard thing. So what am I not looking for? Someone who's happy in their own lane. I think that can be very helpful in some situations. I don't want to alienate anyone, so I'm just trying to think of a scenario when I suppose maybe someone in finance, if they don't want to progress and they're very, very good at bookkeeping, great. You're probably around a little bit longer than some of the roles. But it's even saying that, there's plenty of tech businesses that are automating payments and making sure that, the strategic view on finances within a business now. So I think if you can't evolve yourself, if you're not willing to put in that extra time and energy and effort to educate yourself, you're probably going to struggle in the landscape as it is now because things are changing. I think of something like the medical profession. I have got friends who are putting in their symptoms into ChatGPT and finally finding out after 5-10 years, they're getting a diagnosis and they're turning up to the GP and saying, this is what I've got. And the GP go, oh yeah. How did you find that? It's like, well, ChatGPT told me. There's some real positives for AI. There's plenty of negatives. I'm sure a lot of people are worried for where it's going to take us. But right now, there's some really game-changing things happening because of technology. So if you can't adapt to that, you'll get left behind. I've been speaking to some amazing creatives this last couple of weeks who have gone, I could see that my role would be at risk. So I spoke to an illustrator today. He was a couple of years ago playing around with things with his kid because he wanted to make, a storybook. And look what you can do with ChatGPT now alone. I've been doing it with my little one. I've been putting him into Peppa Pig, printing off a coloring book for him, and he thinks it's. I mean, I'm mum points there. He thinks it's amazing. He's in Peppa Pig. And we can do that. So, an illustrator or an animator or something, they're at risk. So if they can utilize the tools for their future roles, that's what they need to do. So I suppose there's a bit of stubbornness that we can't allow in the companies I work for at the moment.
Yeah, it's really interesting that the stubbornness, the being sort of dead set in our ways. Um, I can see a lot of sort of fear, um, sort of holding back our nimbleness and agility and adaptability, and because there's almost like a need to change when everything around us is changing, and it's sort of it always is, when we truly look at things on a quantum level. Everything is changing around us continuously. But the skills that we need are skills where we can um, take that feedback to heart, because things are changing so rapidly. So it's not an indication of who we are. It's really an invitation for us to start learning. to open our minds to new possibilities, new perspectives. And what I'm hearing too is that, if we're dead set in our lanes, we need a bit of a reality check right now because these lanes are being disrupted and they're changing. The lanes are continuously changing. Where maybe before we thought, our roles and work and businesses were maybe, these a simple map that we can follow. Seems like it's more of like a labyrinth where the stairs and the pathways are shifting and changing, and we just need to be continuously trying new things and experimenting.
We've got a perfect example within like my team alone. I now have the IT manager reporting to me. And that's because we realize actually our OKRs are so intertwined with everything that's going on. There is no point him reporting to our head of product on the tech side, because actually the stuff that we need to do together is so people focused, and that's making sure that the technology is suffice for the people in our team to do their jobs. So he now reports to me, and I manage his OKRs, and something that I'd never ever thought would actually kind of intertwine. I thought we'd always, belong, parallel to each other, because I always have worked with an IT team. But now I'm managing IT, and I'm not an expert. Luckily, I've got a tech brother, so I've kind of been around that sort of IT software for a long time. But it's an interesting way to evolve, because that just shows how close people and computers are, I think, when you merge those two teams together.
The You're in a founder-led business right now, and I've been following a lot of the where a lot of investment is coming into right now in this AI tech boom, and it's looking like it's really opened the doors for AI founder-led businesses. A lot of tech companies where there's a specific solution to a problem, and so therefore here's a platform that we can leverage the latest technology to go and solve. And so what we're noticing is there's all these sort of founder-led shops opening up, these tech businesses, and you've spoken about the sort of stigma of working in founder-led businesses, and how you actually thrive in that environment. Um, what makes it such a powerful learning ground for you?
Founders have a different brain, is probably the best way to describe it. They think differently, they act differently, they just even how they, react to to the market. They I mean, I don't want to speak for all founders, but the founders that, I'm in fourth or fifth business that's been, founder led and directly, I've worked with them. It's it I've learned to be strategic because of them. I've learned to think of the bigger picture because that's how they think. And that really resonates with how I like to work. I don't like, a bit like, I don't want to stay in my lane. I was always, I've been a recruiter for a very long time. The last 18 months I've worked in the HR side of things. And I got to do that because I wanted to grow and I wanted to evolve, and I was allowed to do it. So the founders allow, I suppose they generally have a smaller team around them. So you kind of be able to, if you're lucky enough to, I suppose, work at C-suite level directly into founder, you can make things happen. And they brought you in because they trust what your knowledge is about. So, they aren't the expert in that field. So, my expertise when it comes to recruitment is what got me in the door, and my founder and I at the moment have a great relationship because I'm saying, no, you can't recruit like that, or we can't hire like that, or this is what we need to do to secure that person. And he trusts me and he lets me do my job. And I think that's why it's great to work with a founder, because they usually know their areas of weakness. So they know what they don't have the knowledge in, and they bring in the experts to fill those holes, which allows them to think the bigger picture stuff and allows them to come up with the next crazy idea that what adventure we're gonna go on. And I think that's great. And I think that's why founder businesses are often very successful, because they can think of that bigger picture rather than being in the granular detail, because they've got the team around them doing the granular stuff. And I've seen it where it's not worked so well. I worked in the FMCG space, and there were incredible challenger brands that could have done really well, but the founder was too involved, and he thought he knew marketing really well and wanted to design the product packaging. No, 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 like, let the team do that. And of course, you can have an opinion, but they've done their market research. They've done the comparisons to, to what other competitors are doing. They've, done the tests and stuff like that. So let them do it. So I think that's why I've always enjoyed it, because they know they're not the experts in everything. And usually they pick somebody to fill those holes and plug their holes, and they trust them. And that's what I've really enjoyed.
Yeah, it could be quite a dynamic environment, within a founder-led business, with the organizations I've been involved with, many of which are founder-led, and including the Mindful Institute, it's led by me. I know that I can bring in a lot of dynamism, a lot of change that I've had to um, really be aware of the impact that that has on others. And so, how do you balance this founder driven vision and that energy, like, what I bring into the team, with with the stability that employees need? And I think, you know, you mentioned right now too, there's just organizational structures are not like what they used to be. They're changing rapidly, and you sort of need that adaptability to survive and to grow. Um, how do you hold all of that, and how do you provide that sense of stability for your people?
You do have to have the yin to the yang. So you do need that operational person in place that probably calms us down in some instance, doesn't let us run away with our idea and goes, actually, stop. Let's talk about this. How long is this going to take? What's that going to take? And I think that's the key to it. You do have to have the two brain science. I funny enough learned that very early in my career. I started working with a HR business partner who was the complete opposite of me. We clashed so much until we did it was a kind of an L&D session on it was a color wheel. It was like you learn which color you were. And it was as basic as that, but we learned that we were the opposites. So we learned that she would come to me when she needed some creativity, some ideas, some just like sprinkling on top, and I'd come to her like, can you read this contract? I need to make sure every single line detail is correct. Or, I need to do this workflow, and I've just, my brain's doing this left, right, and center, and she would, help me balance that out. So I think that's what founders often need to find in their leadership team, is somebody that is a good balance, because you do still need some structure. You still need, the team want KPIs. They want to know the North Star. They want to know what we're aiming towards. And sometimes you need that person to help that direction. So whether that be an operational lead, a head of whatever, and making sure that they are the ones that kind of make sure that structure's in place. And again, it's making sure that founder and that relationship with that person is really strong, so they are on the same page, so that if the founder comes up with a new concept, a new idea, or, whatever that is, they can ground them and say, okay, this is great. We really like this idea. We can 100% do it, but, let's talk it through in a bit more detail and actually work out if it's a realistic plan. Can we do it with the skeleton staff that we've got, or whatever it might be, and just seeing if we can actually execute it. You do have to have, I always call it an adult in the room, because I think when me and my current founder get in a room, we can go off on a tangent and come up with some really great ideas. And then we have someone that just goes, you guys don't run away with this idea. We still got to look at this over here right now. So, yeah, I think you need a strong operator.
Mm. And so how do you foster a culture where you have that balance, and then also the innovation and the energy for this rapid growth? You know, are there, when you're putting teams together, are there opportunities to train or to develop together, when fostering that sense of stability? Are there offerings that are provided for, like, what role do offerings have, where, for example, um, team retreats, coming together and maybe actually gaining some tools to support themselves, support ourselves during this time of rapid growth. What role does that play within? SBE Media, SBX, as you're growing? And where do you see that evolve? How do you see that culture building evolving?
You have to start at the recruitment stage. If you're hiring that person, that transparency of what we like in the business is crucial. If you sugarcoat it and tell somebody that we know exactly what we're doing and we know exactly where we're heading, and then they come in on day one and we go, oh yeah, we haven't even got a folder for that. The expectations, don't match the reality, and then people come in a bit blindsided. So the transparency through a recruitment process is key, because then the person that's coming in knows what they're getting. There's not a surprise. Great. Okay, they're on a level playing field already because they know exactly what to expect. Onboarding, I mean, I'm still probably I talk a good talk and then it goes to pot because we're all so busy. But having a really good onboarding plan, meeting people in the team in their first week or first 2 weeks, they're in their direct team, but then the wider team. We might have no reason for somebody in the media side of the business to talk to the car auction side, but actually, if they've met each other on a Zoom call or in a face-to-face meeting for half an hour, that rapport starts to build, and then suddenly there's some reason to work together, and they know it because they've already had a conversation with that other person. So that onboarding is crucial. The communication and collaboration between each department is where we've really been focusing in the last kind of, probably say 12 months, building rapport between each department so they know what's going on. Because if one team asks another team for something and they don't realize how busy the other team is, when they get a no, there's disgruntlement. And it's like, okay, well, what are they even doing? Again, it's that transparency about what people's day jobs look like, what's in the calendar. And we've set up kind of leadership meetings once a week. So we have, a board meeting every Monday lunchtime. There's kind of a heads of meeting or director meeting. And then there's a middle management meeting. And every Monday, those, and I actually sit in all three, again, to make sure that things are filtered down. So whatever the board are talking about, who needs to know it, who's it relevant to, that goes down to head of, and then goes from head of down to middle management as well. Because when that flow doesn't work, the staff level start asking questions. They don't know what's going on. They feel misdirected. If they've had that communication pass through from each layer, it just makes the wheel move. Everybody knows generally where they're going, even if it's only for 6 weeks and then it changes again because of an algorithm change on Meta. It still helps that process, and people feel more secure because they know exactly what's going on. They know, they know what other teams are doing, what they're facing. We went to a large car show last weekend, and actually that turned out to be 4 or 5 departments that all needed to know what was going on, because there was content created from it. There was a car that was going to be sold, and and then it just went on. And luckily we'd had that meeting the week before, and everybody was fully invested. People jumped in and worked over the weekends to get the stuff out there and published and created, and a team environment came out of that. And again, it helps build the relationships between all the individuals, and the collaboration means that generally it's successful. So hopefully, then that content's all live. Everyone's, patting each other on the back and saying thank you for your help and support for getting it done.
Yeah, it's I love how you just sort of framed it, from just these simple building blocks, and it's sometimes really good to just help to remind how important it is to set a very clear precedent right from the get-go when starting an organization, when entering an organization, just real clarity around how do we operate, what are you entering into and what can you expect? And then as well, just making sure that there's those really clear lines of communications and direction. I think right now, because yeah, things can still be changing rapidly, but there's a huge issue if that communication isn't set in place, because that communication can be all that's needed just to let people know, like, what is the stable ground that we're standing on right now. That ground might be shifting, but just let me know what is the ground that we're on right now. What is the direction that we're going? And yeah, it might be changing rapidly. Okay, we need to know that. But if we don't know that, then people are going to feel lost. They're going to feel disconnected. They're going to be asking questions, and 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 it also can breed sort of mistrust. It could things can be unclear. The direction could be unclear. How do we work on things? What are we working on? Yeah, it's really interesting to sort of think of it as these simple building blocks and how important they are.
Yeah, but I think I've been there when those building blocks aren't there. And no one can understand why it's not working, why it's not successful. And then I kind of go, well, how did this person get introduced to the business? Or, what were they sold? And, I have reviews with employees and they'll say, oh, this is not the job that I was sold. People, I listen to everyone's reasons for leaving their current employers. So many times I hear, oh, I was missold my role. It's like, well, that's not helpful for anybody. And nobody wants, a short stint on their CV. And nobody wants to bring somebody in, spend all that money on recruitment and onboarding for them to just leave after 6 months. So if we get the building blocks right, it saves a lot of money.
What are the other sort of, perhaps more people focused approaches when it comes to culture? There's the operational elements in terms of the structure that you put in place, but how do you keep people engaged and motivated and happy in the midst of change? And how do you weave that into what you do at SB Media?
Talk to them. It's funny, but we are humans. And I think this is why, some of the AI stuff hopefully won't apply to the HR people teams for a little while, because I think people need to talk to people. I think sometimes having a little bit of empathy and, and hearing somebody out and listening and seeing what you can do to make a change. Sometimes there are simple requests and the simple changes. Sometimes people just want to be heard. They want to rant, they want to say, this is not working for me. They want to talk through a situation or a process. And, you can't always do that with a manager. You don't want to be, people over fear to be seen that they're not an expert or seen to not not know everything. So, being there for the team is kind of how I always like to position myself. They know that they can come and talk to me. They can, they can pick up the phone. I've got most of the team on WhatsApp. They can Slack me. They can, they can meet me face to face in the office if, we're in there for the day. And I go out for lunch and coffees with the teams and just have a general chat. And I feel like I've got good relationships with the teams, even the ones in, Dubai, where I maybe only met them in person once or twice, or, and they know they can come and talk to me, and it can literally be an airing of a situation, and we can talk it through. I've got the same sort of relationship with my friends. I want, do you want to shout it out? Do you want to cuddle? Do you want some advice? And, we kind of have that approach of like, I can help you. I like to solve problems, so I can try and help you, guide you into solving the situation. I can sit and listen, or we can make an action. We can do something about it, or we can just have a hug. And sometimes, people just wanna be heard and wanna know that it's not falling on deaf ears. And I do try and make change. I do a quarterly employment engagement survey. And if I can make an impact and make a difference and listen, I do. I've had an internal commission scheme launched yesterday because someone had said, "Oh, I'm passing these incredible cars to the SBX team. Do I get anything for it?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, of course, let's look into that." And everyone was, pro it. And that means that, again, that dynamic between the media side and the car auction side, we have access to the most amazing cars on the media side. So if we can sell them and the team, pass on that referral, and that happens, and they get a bit of cash in their pocket at the end of the day, everyone in the team is then very happy, including that person that, had that just random conversation. It's usually on a social platform, it could be an Instagram message. "Want to sell your car?" And yeah, they do. So it's those little things that really make a difference. Of course, I'd love to get everyone a $20,000 pay rise. Wouldn't we all? But they're not things that, I can directly impact straight away. But I can set them on a path to, for the next 6 months, these are your KPIs. This is how you achieve to get that next roll up, And they're the stuff that, again, we're sitting and listening and being, a career coach as well as, a HR manager, and helping them to to see what they can do, or, they might be hating their job. One of the team, she's what we call a sourcer, and they go out and look for incredible content. She wants to edit that content. So again, we're supporting and facilitating her becoming a video editor. And, and you can only do that if you listen and you hear. And that's why I'd like to think that's why we keep and we retain staff, because they're not stuck in their lane. They can, can evolve and grow. And that doesn't have to just be a linear line. It can be completely branching off and doing something else if we can facilitate that.
Yeah, it's not only do we need to create the structures in place where there could be clear lines of communication, clear roles, but there's also that need to also listen and connect with the people that we're working with on an ongoing basis, and foster. A lot of research is showing right now that within teams that are engaged in rapid innovation, so some great research out of NASA around their engineering teams, it's all about trust. It's all about a sense of safety. It's all about a sense of being able to share information and communicate as effectively as possible. And so, as you think about like the listening and providing these opportunities, but there's also looking to create these learning paths, right? It seems like you're creating, or the type of culture that you're looking to foster is one that embraces ongoing learning. And so, how do you weave that in? Is that something that you're providing specific learning opportunities for staff right now to engage? I've heard some of my past guests speak about how they're just doing show and share around how they're using AI, right? They're having opportunities for people to present just back to the organization of what's happening. Interested to hear from you in terms of how are you fostering learning? And then also, how does that come into how your teams form, right? Because it seems like teams are constantly changing, roles are constantly changing. So, how do you create that environment? Is there some learning that you provide your teams around how they can work more effectively too?
I've been very, very lucky to work with some incredible L&D managers. I don't know how I got so lucky. They were internal and external. So I suppose I picked up as being a participant in those sessions. And I loved it and embraced it. So I've always taken that into this role particularly. So yeah, again, it stemmed from, I sit in every performance review at mid-year and end of year, which sounds bizarre to anyone in HR because who has the time to do that? But it was really crucial for me because we had a shift in the strategy of how we rewarded bonus. I wanted to make sure it's fair and consistent. So I sat in all those reviews at the end of the year. And I learned that there was people that there was really simple requirements for training. So whether that be timekeeping or, communication or managing up or being able to present. And there's stuff that I've been on courses for, and I've run them in multiple places before. And so they were a really quick win for me personally. I built those training courses to suit the business. So listen to what people are struggling with, ask the line managers, who needs what. And so I've been rolling them out on a bi-weekly basis for the last it's probably about 8 weeks now. And I've still got about 3 or 4 more sessions to do. We looked at an external provider again. Communication was a really, really big thing that I wanted to improve within 2 particular teams. So again, I sourced a provider and they came in and did a couple of sessions with them and just giving them a different perspective from what I had. So just again to help enforce, because everyone learns differently, but also, not every technique works for everybody. The AI side of things, again, we've been doing a bit of in-house. So I've been working really closely with my IT manager, lots and test and learns. We've got everyone from our, head of creative and our content director all the way through to a video editor testing out different tools and, bringing them back and saying, oh, this is what I can achieve. I mean, I've even been on some of these AI creative tools and trying to make a car into a jet and fly over the Dubai Palm. I mean, it was awful than my one, but again, I'm learning. Um, and so yeah, lots of testimonies, and then we do we call it Turbo Talks. And so we have, again, that's bi-weekly, a member of a team talking about what they do in their job and sharing any expertise that they've got. So, for example, one of the girls talked about Photoshop and just showed some basic things in Photoshop for anyone that wanted to, elevate their skills in that. And they're what we're doing kind of with little to no budget at the moment. If I had lots of money to spend, there's so many external providers that do incredible courses. Even things like media law training. We are a social media platform, so we need to make sure that we're law abiding and, we're doing things to protect our brand. And so something like that, we'd probably start off on an internal kind of sharing and educational session. But then again, I want to look at getting somebody in for, one of the governing bodies in the UK to talk to us about it, to upskill us. And that's not just for, our editorial team or our content team. That I'd invite any of the team to join it. Because you just never know. Even myself on LinkedIn, I have to be conscious of what I say and what I put. We're in, our head office is Dubai. So Middle East has some very, very different laws from the US and the UK. So again, we're making sure that we're sharing internally. So anytime we have an employment law change, particularly in the UK, because we've had a government change, and obviously the US is a bit more complicated because it's state by state, but I share an internal update meeting to tell everybody what's going on, what's changed, and what the impact will be on the business. But also, if there's no direct impact straight away, what do we need to do for when that law comes into place? So again, we've got some really big law changes happening in April 2026, which means that we have to get our recruitment and onboarding processes incredibly slick because of those new law changes. So that just sharing of information is another way of kind of just teaching each other skills. And it's not all coming from me. I've got many of the teams that want to share what they've done. And we've got a kudos channel, and and there's often a call out of like, oh, did you see what so and so created and how well it's done? And it's those kind of pats on the back. We actually, again, you find that they're sharing knowledge. Have SBX sold an incredible car that it's all one off and it's nobody's ever heard of it before, but it's made the press because it's been a huge auction. Great, let's put that in that kudos, and the team will suddenly pick up on that knowledge about the car, because not all of us are car fanatics. Some of us don't even know half of these names of these brands. So again, we can learn even just on cars. Never mind our day-to-day job. And that then becomes an interest, and you start picking up, but you suddenly find out that your neighbor actually used to sell ridiculously expensive collector cars, and suddenly you've got a contact for the business. So yeah, learning comes from everywhere and anywhere, I think, at the moment, whether that be a podcast or a blog post or something. The teams are really good at sharing information.
Yeah, I think this is so important, and I think what you've outlined here is almost like a masterclass in a practical way on how to create an environment where you can learn AI within your team or organization. Turbo Talks, short presentations on, hey, here's how I use this to solve for this, these tests and learns. Hey, this is a new tool that we come across. This is the test that I've done. This is what I've learned. This is how I could use it. And having that opportunity just to empower people to share and to continuously create those environments to learn. Bringing in, I mean, that is no budgets required for that, right? You could build internal onboarding to different AI tools, right? Just brief videos via Slack videos, or any of the million different platforms that are out there, little vignettes, the script, etc., sharing, hey, this is how we're using this technology now at this point in time, and it's probably going to change, but hey, take a look. This can inform you and your workflows. And then as well, you could bring in some other providers that can provide opportunities for this is how we communicate effectively as a team. This is how we can learn rapidly. This is how these are the changes that are happening in the industry to stay up to date with all these changes and to create that learning environment. So I think it's just so important for just people. Just those are fundamental building blocks to bring in, and it doesn't stop, right? Even with the team, like you said, it's always about refreshing different ways of seeing our team, being aware of how we lead, and then that evolving over time. I'm so grateful for you sharing that. And you've mentioned, Joe, that some of your most defining leadership lessons came from bad managers. And can you share one story that really shaped how you lead today?
One story. I think when we previously chatted, I had a manager who you just didn't know what you were going to get. So you would maybe want to ask for a holiday day, which is just a simple ask, and you would just, get your head bitten off. And then the next day you could go and produce a bit of work, and they would be, a glowing review about how it's the most amazing thing. And I think that was always something that resonated with me because it wasn't just an individual situation. She was very much like that with the full team. So we all kind of grouped together to say, all right, not a great day. Don't go ask for anything, or a great day. This is the day you want to go in for a pay rise. Like this is you're gonna get a yes today. So I think for me, I learned about that consistency. I want my team or anyone to come and be able to talk to me and know that they're going to get a certain Joe. They're going to get a Joe that's hopefully helpful, or at least, a Joe that, says, oh, well, I don't know the answer. I'll come back to you. And I think especially in my role now, because, we only have a small team. I mean, I say a small team is still, just short of 100 people to look after, which is, still, if everyone had an issue every day, I wouldn't get anything else done. But they know that they can come and talk to me. And even if I'm, I have a 3-year-old, I have a dog and a 3-year-old, there are times when sleep is very non-existent in my life. And so I'm good at, we've got a really good kind of environment where I can say to them, I haven't had much sleep. Like, please don't ask me anything too complicated. Like, let's get it down, let's get some thoughts, but we'll really attack it the next day. And, if I've got a back-to-back day where I'm, interviewing or, meetings back-to-back and someone comes at me for something strategic, I'm probably going to be able to say to them that, yeah, today's not that day. And I think, again, that's an incredible culture to foster. And I learned that because of having managers that didn't have that. You should be able to show up as your authentic self. We work on social media. We know that the best, content creators and the influencers show up with their best self. And that's what I want to foster in our working culture, is that you can have a bad day. We're human. But you just don't need to shout and scream at somebody to get something done. If something's not working and it's frustrating you, okay, there's a way of giving that feedback. And again, I did a session only last week on giving feedback. And I'm hoping that, the team take away some of those really constructive way to give feedback, and either give peer-to-peer feedback, and we can allow, we can learn and evolve from each other. So yeah, having bad managers actually did me a favor. In a bad way. Obviously, it wasn't nice at the time, but now I look back and, I did learn a lot from her. I learned a great way of how to be, in her talent and HR and people, but I also learned how not to be a manager.
There's in how fast that the pace is right now for many people in leadership positions, and in many different roles that are changing rapidly in this tech age. uh, there's almost this need for urgency, and I think feeling compelled just to keep going and deal with things as fast as you can. And it can be so damaging to a relationship by not taking that moment to pause, to become present, and shift out of really a distraction, right? Just constantly getting pulled, your attention being pulled in all these different directions. That can lead to sort of emotional outbursts. It can lead to this scattered type of frenzy that you might not even know why people are reacting the way that they're reacting to you. but because we're so caught up in our own stories, we're so caught up in our own tasks. And, what I was hearing is that by pausing, by taking that moment to check in before responding, you could provide much more consistency, much more stability at a time when that's what people need. And even if it's delivering some challenging information, it's even more important to become as present and as grounded as you can be so that you can approach it as skillfully as you can and not have to deal with these ongoing ramifications. And yeah, how do we become present like that? How do we maintain that grounded state in this time of frenzy? And so I'm curious. Yeah.
Someone actually said to me a stat, and I really wish I could recall it correctly, but it was something like if you have a negative interaction with somebody, it takes 7 more interactions to come back from that. That's that was impactful for me because I thought, yeah, you're right. I've seen, you know, someone experience negative reaction with, one of the leaders, and then it's taken the good time to earn that trust back. And you've got that in your personal relationships as well, haven't you? People, as they say, hold grudges, or they keep that in the memory. And it's 7 times of positive reactions after that, just to get back into an even keel.
Oh, definitely. And the skill to actually have those positive interactions after that negative reaction, that takes even more energy just, to repair, right? Um, and so, how do you maintain your sense of grounding? A 3-year-old and a pooch and a rapidly growing business, and it's digital, so you're virtual and across time zones. What do you do to recharge and to support yourself?
When I had my little one, everyone says, "Oh, it takes a village." And I think that resonates with being in a startup business as well. You can't do it on your own. You can't. You burn out, and we've seen that time and time again. I worked in fashion and that was notorious for burnout. Everybody needed everything now, and I'm sure it's even worse now with the way that, some of the fast fashion retailers work. So I have a friend who is also kind of my mentor. So if I need a bit of a sanity check on where I'm going in my career and how I want to evolve, or even just, she's much wiser than I am. I can just run something past her and say, "I'm not being mad, am I? This is not a normal situation," or whatever. I actually have a fitness and wellness coach. So again, to keep my sanity, I need to exercise. I think again, we're all quite aware of what physical exercise does for our mental state. So, being able to make sure I get that time out, having the dog, cocker spaniel, 3 walks a day, still not tired. So I make sure that I, block that time out in my diary, even if it means I have to have a walking call with somebody. A walking meeting's been something that's been in my diary. Again, I had an amazing female founder who said, I'm going to take this meeting, off, I'm going to do it on a call instead of virtual because I need to walk. I was like, yeah, great. So, yeah, making sure I've got my fitness in. We obviously, you and I talked about this, the kind of neurodiversity. I'm going through my ADHD diagnosis at the moment. So I can't do things like meditation, and my brain doesn't work like that. So finding what works for me, and that could be literally, could be a punch bag. It could be really sweating it out and trying to get switch off, because I think the switching off is the important bit. Setting boundaries. I never did that. I didn't do that in my previous career until my little boy came along, and he's forced me to set boundaries. He usually waltzes on in at 5 p.m. and demands my attention, and I want to be there for him. I want to be present. So yeah, he's been on a couple of Zoom calls and met the team, and again, they all kind of chat to him, but then I make sure I stop, and that time then after that is with him, till he's asleep. And then, yeah, okay, mum brain, it has to switch off then, and I might have to go back to work because of the different time zones. But I make sure that after that, I switch off. I often read. I read a book. In fact, I actually started a book club within the business. Again, for another way for us all to just to communicate and chat and have, common interests. And so it's all those other things. And I notice when one slips, I'm, if I stop eating well, or I stop exercising, or I bought a house recently. So throwing that into the mix just sent me in a little spiral, and, making sure that, again, I've got the right people around me, whether that be friends or family, or, or a coach, to just put me back on track, so that I get the rest and I get the switch off and I set my boundaries, and when I do what I do. And, the business is really good at respecting that. And again, I'm really fortunate I work in a company that understands that, Theo is my world. I look after, you know, all the employees on a day-to-day basis, but at nighttime they're not on my mind, because I'm worrying about, is Theo's room too hot? Is it too cold? Has he got his socks on? Has he eaten enough food? Is he going to sleep through the night? And again, it's that headspace. Um, and I don't. I've learned to switch off from work, because otherwise, going home with the emotional baggage would, I think, then affect my mental stability. I need to give everyone my everything when I'm at work, to solve issues for them, and, make sure that they're okay. But my home life's important to me.
You know, uh, Having two little ones, I always share with. I think it's so important to really rethink how you work and approach the supports that you have in your life when you're a young parent, and especially within a working within a dynamic industry that's constantly pulling at your attention. When I just had my first child, and this is coming from a person who has been meditating for 20 years. I've been on many retreats, and I continue to go on them regularly. Have so many things in place in terms of community to help keep me grounded in that way. I burnt out like 3, 4 times during my first my son, my Phoenix, and who's now 10. And then with my daughter coming in, I just had to really rethink just how I structure my life and how I want to feel, and to really think about what are the ways that I'm taking care of myself. And I'm really grateful for you sharing some of the ways that you do that. And it's such a helpful reminder for me, and I think for anybody listening, to really think about, like, what are the practices that you're doing or not doing, and how do you feel? And just continuously remind yourself, like, it doesn't have to be a whole game changing rethinking of your life, but like, what's your intention for today? Like, even right now, thinking about, what is your intention for today? How are you going to take care of yourself? And that's going to be the foundation that impacts how you show up for others. Really, it really starts with taking care of ourselves. We have to put that oxygen mask on ourselves before we take care of others. Otherwise, all your oxygen is going to be depleted, and you've got no fuel to burn, right? And so, I'm really grateful for you sharing that. And practices change, and it's interesting. I've been doing a lot of research and work in neurodiversity informed mindfulness. I love this new, like, understanding that, hey, we're all uniquely different. When you think about neurodivergence, actually the research is showing that our brains, our neural wiring, is actually more unique than it is similar. And so you really need to listen to what works for you, right? And find the practices that work for you. And there's a lot of practices that have no idea of anything about neurodivergence. And maybe even you're just listening to this and this is the first time you're hearing about neurodiversity. Look into it. But it's so important to know that, hey, you might be engaging in a meditation practice from maybe a tradition or a person that has no idea that the fact that we have unique brain profiles. It could work for a number of people, but it might not work for you. So shift, try something else. And there are other ones too. And I'd love to send you some of that, some of those practices, Joe. And finally, I mean, this has been just such a thriving conversation, Joe. How can people connect with you or learn more about your work at SBX?
Obviously, the LinkedIn is the easiest tool to connect with me. Funny enough, LinkedIn's got a bit of a funny setting that not many people know about, but there is a 30,000 connections limit. And so I'm close to that, and I ask everyone to follow me rather than connect with me, which sounds very arrogant, but my job obviously relies on the fact that I can connect with people on LinkedIn. So if I can't do that because I've hit my limit, I'm literally, it's useless. So following me and listening to what I've got to say on there, I say listening, but obviously reading what I've got to say on there is always appreciated. And I think because, I'm very UK centric, I can't help it. That's obviously been my bread and butter. I love learning the different traits of the US market. Even someone commented on, one of my posts today about kind of salary advertising. The UK, we're not required to put a salary on there. It was a choice of mine when I recently advertised a role, but the US, obviously some states, it's a law to advertise a salary. So, as I grow and I learn and I develop, I'm learning these new laws, but also tricks and traits of the industry in the US. So yeah, LinkedIn is obviously the easiest one, but obviously I'd also love everyone to check out SBX Cars. We are, a startup still. We're nearly 18 months old and we have the coolest cars. So obviously that's, we're buying and selling incredible cars. So obviously would encourage everyone to have a look, even if it's just to window shop, because they're insane cars are on there. So if you fancy a bit of window shopping of some luxury cars, I'd definitely go. Send everyone there.
Fantastic. We'll definitely put the links into the podcast episodes, so please do check them out. I not many people may know this, but I am a car fanatic. Of course, I shared that I've been following Supercar Blondie for many years now, and truly these cars are just absolutely incredible. And so I'm gonna do some window shopping and dreaming there. And thank you again, Jo, so much for joining us here today. I'm sure our listeners are going to take away so many insights from navigating founder-led businesses to creating learning environments for teams to thrive, for individuals to thrive in an AI era, and to building resilient teams. There's just so much here. So thank you so much.
No, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure chatting with you. I think very like-minded people, so this is an easy flow of a conversation, and hopefully, the listeners can take something away. At least one learn would be great.
Well, I'm definitely going to be taking some things away here and implementing them right away. And this brings us to the end of another episode of Leading Minds Revealed. I'll see you on the next one.
Leading Minds Revealed podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next episode.